Good evening, everyone. My name is Darlene Maria, and I am ASCBC Vice President here at Columbia Basin College. We are delighted to have you here tonight and share with us the 16th District Debate. Thank you for joining us, and we would also like to extend our gratitude for those who made tonight possible. The Pasco Chamber of Commerce, Tri-City Regional Chamber of Commerce, West Richland Chamber of Commerce, Charter Communications, Tri-City Herald, and the League of Women Voters. We are very excited for tonight, and we would appreciate if members of the audience could turn off their phones. Bathrooms are to the left of the exit doors. Prepare yourself to be challenged, inspired, and open your minds to new ideas. Please welcome our moderator of the night, Kay Adam.
Thank you, Darlene, and good evening, everyone. My name is Kay Autumn, and on behalf of the League and the other members of our coalition, I too welcome you this evening. Tonight we'll be hearing from the two candidates running for United States Representative for the 4th Congressional District. They are Mary Baechler and Richard Doc Hastings. Welcome. I'd also like to introduce the members of our panel who will be asking questions this evening. Greg McConnell, publisher of the Tri-City Herald, Dana Cowley with Charter Local Edition Northwest, and Jeff Pogela, news director at KONA Radio. Tonight's forum is being taped by Charter Communications for rebroadcast on television. It is also being broadcast live on KONA Radio. There are a couple of important rules for this evening. Darlene mentioned the first one. Please, if you have your cell phone, make sure it's off. Second, I would ask that from this point forward, you refrain from showing your support for or your disagreement with either candidate during the forum. In other words, no applause, no verbal comments or other noises for or against either candidate. We will thank both candidates with our applause at the end of the evening. We will be using the following format. Each candidate will be given 3 minutes for an opening statement. The order of opening and closing statements was determined by a coin toss just before we began. We will then move to the question and answer portion of the evening. Our 3 panelists will ask their first round of questions, followed by me reading a question that has been submitted in writing by someone in the audience. We will repeat this 3 panelist, 1 audience rotation as time allows. If you did not get a note card to write a question on and you would like one, please raise your hand and someone will bring you one. Once you've completed your question, hold it up and someone will pick it up and forward it to a group of members of our coalition who will review the questions before bringing them up to me. Both candidates will answer the same questions. A panelist may ask a follow-up question, but not within that same question round. All audience questions should be written in such a way that both candidates can answer it. Responses will be limited to 2 minutes, followed by a 1-minute rebuttal by the first respondent if they so choose. At about 7:45, I will ask each candidate to give a 2-minute closing statement. A member of the League is the timer this evening. She will be holding up a paddle indicating the candidate has 30 seconds left to speak. At that point, the candidate should begin to wrap up what they are saying. The red paddle, of course, means stop. Candidates, please be sure to look at the timer every so often so that you will be aware of the time you have left. So we are ready to proceed with opening statements, and we will begin with Mr. Hastings.
Thank you, Kay, and it is a pleasure for me to be here. This election presents a clear choice for America's future, because I believe this election is a national referendum. My Democrat opponent approves of the job that President Obama is doing and believes he's taking our nation in the right direction. I don't agree. I believe we're headed in the wrong direction. President Obama, Nancy Pelosi, and Congressional Democrats are committed to a government knows best approach that balloons spending and piles up mountains of debt. Common sense tells us that we simply cannot afford to continue down this path. Job creation must be the top priority, and there are many positive approaches that we can take. We must protect hardworking Americans and small businessmen from job-destroying tax hikes. We should stop the avalanche of red tape that's strangling job creators. We should continue to open new overseas markets for our agriculture industry, and we should lower gas prices by producing more energy here in America. The specter of Obamacare is looming over our economy. It imposes $1 trillion in higher taxes. It puts a board of unelected bureaucrats in charge of our personal health care decisions, and it steals $700 billion from Medicare. My opponent defends Obamacare. I will vote again to repeal it. Both Medicare and Social Security are facing bankruptcy if no action is taken. Both must be strengthened without benefit changes. Let me repeat that. Both must be strengthened without benefit changes for those seniors in the system. We've got to allow choices, though, for our children, our grandchildren, or there will be nothing there when it's their time to retire. Every year that Barack Obama has been president, there have been trillion-dollar budget deficits. That's historic, and it's dangerous. It's time to stop borrowing from China, and it's time to live within our means. It's time to enact a balanced budget amendment. So the choice in this election, to me, is very clear. While my opponent proudly declares her support for President Obama, I support, obviously, a different direction, because bigger government, more spending, and higher taxes simply won't get our country on the right track. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ms. Baechler, your opening statement, please.
Thank you. My name is Mary Baechler, and I'm running for Congress in the 4th Congressional District, and I'm really happy to be here tonight, and I'm so grateful that you all came. I'm grateful to the Tri-Cities Herald and the League of Women Voters and their coalition for putting this on and giving us a chance to talk to the voters. I'm running because I care deeply about the people in the 4th Congressional District. 30 years ago, I came here immensely pregnant, had my baby Travis about 2 weeks after getting here, just like Joseph and Mary. And this is the amazing thing about our great country, that the girl I was then would have never dreamed of running for public office, but that's something about America that makes us wonderful, that a regular citizen can run for office. And anyone can dream and go there. I have the greatest respect for Doc Hastings. I know he has worked really hard, but I think it's time that we come across the aisles. I believe that the Americans really want Congress to work and actually get the work of the country done. And when politics are divisive, when enormous amounts of money are floating through Congress, it makes it really hard to get that done. An example of coming together is the Yakima Integrated Water Enhancement Project. This is a case where all parties of government, the Yakima Nation, environmentalists, industry, all came together to work out a plan how to preserve our water resources in the Yakima Basin area. It's a really great example. I'm running because I will protect Social Security and Medicare. I believe these programs are reasonably sound, and with small measures we can keep them going, like scrapping the cap on the highest earners in the Social Security area. I believe in fair taxation. Fair taxation is critical for creating jobs. When the tax breaks go to companies like Exxon and Chevron, or to millionaires, then those dollars are not available to us to go and spend. We need to keep the tax breaks for the middle class and the lower income families so they are able to come into your community and spend their dollars. That creates jobs up and down the line. And I care deeply about health care for women and for all people. You know, the Declaration talked about the pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness. All the other industrialized countries have figured this out. So I appreciate the chance to run. I'm very grateful, and I love talking to voters, so thank you for listening.
Thank you. Mr. McConnell, would you please begin the first round of questions, and Mr. Hastings will respond first.
In August of last year, Congress and the President agreed to cut government spending across the board by somewhere between 7 and 9% if a bipartisan super committee couldn't reach an agreement on a budget package. That approach to spending cuts is known as sequestration. That super committee failed to reach an agreement, which triggers sequestration effective January 1st of 2013. Given the Tri-Cities through the Hanford cleanup and the National Laboratory receives billions of dollars in government spending each year, that has a potential drastic effect on our local economy. The question is twofold. Why did the super committee, in your mind, fail to come up with a budget agreement? And secondly, can sequestration be avoided?
Well, first of all, I too am disappointed that the super committee did not come to an agreement, because the committee was made up equally of Republicans and Democrats in both the House and the Senate, and they simply couldn't come to an agreement. So now we have this situation. Last spring, I voted for the House budget that would have addressed sequestration in part by postponing it for 1 year. Now, the House voted in that position. I voted for it. The Senate has yet to take up that legislation, so we're still in sequestration. So the question is now, what can we do before those cuts hit in on January 1st? I believe, quite frankly, the election will have a big impact on that. If the election turns out as I like it to be, I think that there will be a movement to push the sequestration up for 1 year so we can have some time to deal with these cross-the-board cuts. But I, too, am very, very disappointed that the super committee didn't come to a resolution. It was disappointing, and these cuts really are real. But I want to emphasize, last spring, I voted for legislation that would have postponed that so we could have dealt with it in a much more timely manner. But unfortunately, the Democrat-led Senate has not moved on that, so we're in this situation.
Ms. Baechler?
You know, Thomas Jefferson talked about that if people were in office too long, they would build up so much power that they became almost like a feudal patriarchacy. And what we see in Congress is we see that Congress is not working across the aisles. I question, why are there even aisles? And Congress should be getting the work of the country done. And sequestration is something really to be avoided. If Paul Revere was here, he'd be saying, watch out for sequestration. Sequestration will hit the seniors in our area in central Washington. It will affect the Indian tribes more gravely. It means cuts to social services for people that are homebound. I think it is the duty of Congress to completely put aside political party and affiliation and work across the aisles and get this done. And there's still time to do a short-term extension of the budget so that this calamity does not fall on the people of Central Washington.
Thank you. Ms. Cowley, your first question, please, and Ms. Baechler. Oh, I'm sorry. Did you want to rebut something?
I will simply say that once again that this problem can be solved, but it obviously depends on the election. And the final point I would make: the deepest cuts on sequestration will happen in defense, although it will hit other areas across the board, as you suggested. But when you think about that from a national security standpoint, one of the reasons the United States was formed to provide for the common defense. This is something in this volatile world that is very, very serious. That's why that was one of the provisions, by the way, in the bill that I voted for that would have kicked the time ahead for the sequestration, particularly in defense.
Okay, thank you. Now, Ms. Kelly.
Yes. If elected or re-elected, where do you propose we make the cuts that we need to make to bring the budget back in order and to restore our credit rating?
This is my question, right?
Yes.
Thank you. You know, I think the most important thing is to grow the economy in a healthy way. We need to hold spending down. We do need to be really budget conscious. But the most important thing is to have the economy working, people going back to work, so that you change that ratio between the gross national product and the debt. And these are the things, the building a healthy economy needs to be at the forefront. That might mean tax incentives for businesses, for when they add workers, for when they innovate. It means help for farmers to get their products out in international markets. But these are the things that build health.
Okay, Mr. Hastings?
Well, first of all, I have voted the last 2 years for a budget that would get us into balance. Would it get us into balance immediately? No, but it get us into balance in a time limit that we can live with. But there's no question, as Mary pointed out, a growing economy is the key to this, because a growing economy is what creates the economic activity that pays the taxes that funds the government. But the specific question is, where would you cut if I had a choice? Now, there's a broad areas across the board, no question about it. But let me start with one. If we repealed Obamacare, we would save trillions of dollars, and I have voted already to repeal Obamacare, and I'd do so again. And the residue that's left over for the bailouts that happened under President Bush and President Obama that I voted against, there's a residue left there. I would end all of the existing bailout legislation. That too would save some money. And I think we have to take a look at our foreign aid. Now, that's a small part of the budget. I'm not going to suggest it's going to balance with foreign aid. But with the volatility in certain parts of the world, I think we have to examine foreign aid. Now, I agree with Governor Romney. I have voted in the past to eliminate funding for NPR, and I would do so again. I think that agency can stand on its own, quite frankly, without the federal government. I think we need to look at Amtrak. Amtrak loses money, particularly in the western part of the United States. So those are just a couple of areas that I am on record, as a matter of fact, of voting to vastly eliminate or vastly reduce or to eliminate, and I would do so again.
Do you have anything to add?
Thank you. Doc Hastings voted for the Ryan budget, and the Ryan budget would eliminate Social Security and Medicare as we know, throwing seniors into a social experiment. It also eliminates 7,000 student loans in this state alone. And those are loans for kids in this district to go to college. I think we need to do cuts a little bit more on the military side, but I would like to see us working on things that are going to grow the country in a more healthy way. And I think you can't cut your way into greatness. I think to a certain extent you need to do what President Kennedy did and say, how do we have the greatest education system in the world, and aim at that and grow the economy.
Thank you. Mr. Pogula, your first question, please.
Each of you is seeking to be just one person in a body of 435 people. No matter who is elected, it is unlikely the 4th District will be represented by someone who is high up in party or congressional leadership. Given this, how will you be able to push the 4th District's agenda and get things done?
Well, yes, I am one of 435. That was the genius of our founding fathers to create a representative government. And that figure now is 435. But I am one of 20 members that chairs a standing committee, the Committee on Natural Resources. The Committee on Natural Resources is very important for this part of the country, because it has sole jurisdiction over the Bonneville Power Administration, of course, which is our electricity wholesaler, which associates then with our dams. It has jurisdiction over all of the irrigation projects in the country. We have 2 major irrigation projects in Yakima and the Columbia Basin project. So these issues are very, very important, and as chairman of the committee, I can watch out for the best interests of the Northwest. I mean, for example, we are one of the few areas in the country that get an abundance of our power from hydropower. And yet there is a constant pressure from other parts of the country to tear out the dams in the lower Snake River. That's why I introduced legislation, and we had a hearing here in Pasco precisely on re-regulating or defining how we regulate federal facilities and dams. You can do that when you chair a committee, particularly the committee that I chair, the Committee on Natural Resources.
Thank you. Ms. Baechler?
You know, whoever comes in after Doc Hastings will be junior compared to his almost 20 years in the Congress. I think if I am elected to Congress, I will be a tireless advocate for this congressional district. For example, the Farms Bill. With Doc Hastings' seniority, if I were in his shoes, I would have been leading protest marches to say, we have to get this bill passed. We can't leave the farmers hanging out there with the droughts that are happening and with their bill not passing. I think it's so important to act as an advocate, and that's what I'll be doing. Our congressional district is almost 50% minority majority. It is 50, we have 670 people more or less in this congressional district, and half of them are women. I will be working as an advocate to serve all these people of this district at all times, and that's where my energy will go. My opponent, with all due respect, his energy has gone into creating deregulation for oil industries, which we don't have here, for coal industries, which we don't have here, and for the Dams Act, which he said himself would not pass. I think it's better to get the bills passed that will really help our people, like a budget, so sequestration doesn't affect our seniors.
Thank you. Anything else?
I would like to respond specifically on the Farm Bill. And I, too, am disappointed the Farm Bill hasn't passed. But 2 points to be made here. First of all, nearly 80%, not quite 80%, of the Farm Bill is not farm-related. It is social programs associated with a coalition that was put together years ago. And now the Farm Bill is roughly, I'll say 25% to be in round figures, really farm. Now, there is little disagreement within the farm aspects of the Farm Bill. And part of that Farm Bill is a market access program, which allows our community here, our agriculture community, to market products overseas. I'm the sponsor of that provision going back to the Farm Bill before last, and it has maintained in ensuing Farm Bills, and it'll be in this Farm Bill. Because I mentioned in my opening statement, one way to grow the economy is to create overseas markets for our agriculture industry. The market access program does that. But understand, again, the Farm Bill hasn't passed, not because of the it is because of the social programs that are embodied in the Farm Bill.
Thank you. Here's our first question from the audience. You both mentioned the Farm Bill. This question is, what ideas do you have to support specifically Central Washington farmers? And you will go first.
Well,
no, I'm wrong. You go first.
You know, I think there is just a treasure trove of things we can be doing to advocate for our farmers. I remember Glenn Phipps in Yakima, an economic development coordinator, held a whole series of international trade shows that brought people from all over the world to look at our produce and also the machinery and the tooling that we are so great at here. I think we need to have a mandate or a program from the government to help support those kinds of things, to help give tax incentives for innovation, to give tax incentives for marketing offshore, and to just look and meet with farmers all the time and say, what can we do to help you? Water is such an essential part of this too, and we need to have regional water planning that will look at how do we build these reservoirs and make sure that our farmers are going to be covered for their irrigation needs while still bringing back the health of the fish. The fisheries are so important commercially, but we have to stand with our farmers, and the Farm Bill should have gotten done.
Thank you.
Well, I mentioned a couple of aspects of the Farm Bill, and again, repeating, a big portion of the Farm Bill is not farm-related. But understand that our agriculture industry here, we're one of the most diverse agriculture areas in the country. As a matter of fact, I probably shouldn't be condescending, but I want to congratulate the Tri-City Herald for their series of articles on the diversity of our agriculture. I thought those articles were very, very good. So I am condescending, I guess, a bit there. But our agriculture industry is an industry that is not overly associated with the Farm Bill, because the Farm Bill, as far as subsidies are concerned, tend to be more towards what we call program crops. And the only program crop we have in this state is wheat. But when you look at our apple industry, our potato industry, our hop industry, the grape industry, and the wine grape industry, and the non-wine grape industry, those are all non-program crops. And the one thing that they have constantly told me over the years that they want is agriculture research. And we have a research center, a national research center in Wapato, and we have a state research center in Prosser. And every year I have, within the Farm Bill and in the appropriation process, gotten funds so that could be matched by industry to do the certain research that is so important. That is very important, for example, to our wine industry because we are now growing the rootstock, if you will, right here in Washington, as opposed to shipping it in from California where they've had some disease problems. So the research aspect of the Farm Bill is very, very important, and that has been embodied within the Farm Bill. In fact, in the last Farm Bill, I led a coalition to make sure that the minor crops, those that I just described to you, they're not minor, but they are when you define them, would have proper research funding, and we've accomplished that, and it will be in this Farm Bill when the Farm Bill passes.
Anything else?
You know, as a former businesswoman at Baby Jogger, we knew manufacturing. And for anyone in business, you always need increased sales and lower costs. And the question should be, how do we help our farmers to get this? How do we get increased sales? If a little family business that started on the kitchen table could send Baby Joggers to 40 countries, we need to send our agricultural products to 40 countries, and I will work to do that.
Thank you. Okay, we're ready for round 2 of questions, and I think we'll begin with Ms. Cowley so that we don't have the same person answering first each round. So if you would ask your next question, and Mr. Hastings will go first.
Yes. What bill do you propose to put forth in this next session, whoever gets elected, that would deal with illegal immigration and farm worker guest worker program, and then how can we move forward with that when our efforts in the past to try to form a guest worker program have failed?
Well, that is clearly a major issue in this country because those crops largely that I described just a moment ago are labor intensive, and the agriculture labor market has always been a migratory labor force. Generally starts in California, works up. Now there's been some modifications over the years. The last immigration bill that was passed in 1986 supposedly had a provision for agriculture called the H-2A program. It frankly hasn't worked. The only ones that can avail themselves of that are large growers, and even they tell me that they have some real problems with it. So what we really need is a guest worker bill where people can come up here if they desire and they can go home. And the end result of that would be certainty for the growers, large growers and small growers, that they'll have a labor force that's reliable. It is interesting in this time, people have said, well, you know, if we just open it up to domestic labor, we could have a labor force to harvest our crops. Well, we're experiencing 10% unemployment here in the 4th District. And growers over and over and over tell me that there is not a domestic labor force that comes out to harvest these crops. So what we need then, and what I would work on, and by the way have been working on, is a guest worker bill that will replace the H-2A program that simply is not working.
Thank you. Ms. Baechler?
You know, this is such an important question for the 4th Congressional District. The 4th Congressional District is about a little bit over 40% Latino background. From 1990 to 2010, Latino families in this district grew, or in the state, grew 357% to 780,000. With apples, the apples grew from 88 in 1988, they were 488 million, and now it's 1.6 billion apples. We have built this region with immigrant workers. They have been part and parcel of what we have done. We need a comprehensive and compassionate immigration reform. I think it's important to look at best practices. This is something that business taught me. In business, when you have a quality issue, you have no blame. You say, where are we now? Where do we want to go? Canada has a fraction of our illegal immigration. Canada has written into their law that they will not break up families. So we need something that is comprehensive, that's compassionate, and gets the workers in for the farmers right now. Yakima has a shortage today. But these are the families that help build everything for all of us around here. So we need to figure out what's the right thing to do, what's the ethical thing to do that serves all the people in this congressional district.
Thank you.
Let's just remind ourselves that we are a nation of immigrants, and I dare say that all of you that are sitting here and your ancestors, when they came from the old country, wherever that was, they were probably not the elite in the old country. But they came to America because of the opportunity that has presented itself with the freedom and liberty that's embodied in our Constitution. But we also are a government of laws, and that is the issue. The issue is illegal immigration and how we can bridge that to help our economy, largely agriculture economy in this area. That's why we have to have a reform of the H-2A program. But we should always be cognizant of making sure that we secure our borders for the security of our country. That is an important aspect that was discussed in the last time there was a big effort to try to have a immigration reform bill.
Thank you. Mr. Pogela, your next question, please.
Staying on the topic of farming, since this is a very big issue for this district. As you know, farming is big business here in the 4th Congressional District, but there are questions about the commitment that both of you have to the farming industry. Congressman, in years past, the American Farm Bureau has given you a rating on agriculture as low as 66%. Ms. Baechler, your website is devoid of issues related to farming, save for criticizing the congressman about the Farm Bill. So my question to you is this. If elected, and even before you are elected, how do you convince voters that you are behind them? How do you convince farmers that you are behind them and that you will provide a competitive market for 4th District farmers?
You're first, yes.
You know, I'm a small campaign, and those issues pages will be up. But on my Facebook page, when the Farm Bill was on the verge of being passed but not passed, I commented frequently about that. And I go and I talk to farmers, and I've been a farmer. Usually I have to make sure I don't have a little hay on me as I come into these things. So I think it's so important to listen to our farmers, to be out there talking to them. But I know right now the Farm Bill, with it not passing, and if nothing is done before the end of the year, the dairy farmers are hit really hard by this. So I think it's a matter of working for the people in the district and being very specific, but going to them to learn what can we do to help them on it. And I think it's important to be aggressive about these bills that actually have to pass. So Doc Hastings, with all due respect, spent a lot of time writing the Save Our Dams Act and Stop the War on Coal Act, and he focused on those and not on the farms in our district. I will focus on the farms. Just looking at the economy, I was looking at the labor numbers. Farming is by far our greatest economy other than government. So in this congressional district, we have to support it.
Thank you. Mr. Hastings?
Well, first of all, I was just named friend of the Farm Bureau by the Washington State Farm Bureau. And the Washington State Farm Bureau represents 41,000 families, and I think they certainly have an idea who is friendly to them. And I would argue that the Farm Bureau is probably the most aggressive of all the farm organizations, and there are a lot of farm organizations out there. But in order for the agriculture community to grow, they have to have markets. I was recently named one of the few, a handful, that had a 100% voting record on trade issues. Trade issues are big for agriculture, and they're especially big for agriculture here because of our proximity to the markets in the Far East. I mentioned about my efforts to make sure the Snake River dams aren't removed, because we all know if the Snake River dams are moved, then other dams. And by the way, dams back up water. What does that water do? It irrigates crops. So for my efforts there is certainly recognized by the agriculture industry. And one thing that I have heard over and over and over as it relates to fiscal policy and tax issues, listen, give us tax certainty. Make sure that the tax code has some certainty so we can make some plans. And I have been obviously a leader on trying to flatten the tax and make our tax code certain. So we talked about the Farm Bill earlier on, but I just find it a bit odd that reference was made to the Farm Bureau when I was named Friend of the Farm Bureau for Washington State.
Thank you. Anything else?
I just think in every case when you talk to somebody that has a business, what's on their mind is, how do I get more sales? How do I bring costs down? Can I get the loans I need to get? These are important things that as a Congresswoman I would work on. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. McConnell, your turn again.
There's a lot of talk about the sustainability of Social Security and Medicare. I was wondering what you believe, what steps Congress should take to make sure that those safety nets are in place for future generations.
You're first.
Well, first of all, I mentioned in my opening statement that we need to address Social Security and we need to address Medicare. And the caveat is, whatever changes should be made should not affect anybody that is currently in the system, and for that matter, that is near the system. It simply is unfair to change the rules in the middle of the game. But we have to understand, Medicare goes broke in a dozen years. Social Security goes broke 10 years after that, roughly. So whatever changes we make has to be made with the next generation in mind. We can't get into a situation in this country where we are pitting grandparent against grandchild. And if we don't address these issues now, then we are cheating our children and grandchildren. Now, I believe the best way to address, just in certain areas, in Medicare alone, is to give more choices to seniors. I totally reject the idea that once you become 65, you can't make choices. And yet with the Medicare system where it is, you're into a rigid system with no choices. I would propose putting more choices into the system with the premium support model that I have voted for in the past. And as far as Social Security is concerned, it too goes dead broke. You talk to somebody in their 30s right now if they think Social Security will be there, and they'll say, of course it won't. But they're paying 15% of their payroll tax to support Social Security. Don't we owe them something? I believe just one idea, is to allow them to have a personal account where they can put money in Social Security that will stay with them and their family. We've got to have these reforms, because if we don't, we are killing these two programs. Because when they go broke, they're broke. Who benefits by that?
Thank you. Ms. Baechler.
You know, I'm running on preserving Social Security and Medicare, and I will work really hard to protect these programs. With Social Security, it's got a finite number of years, but it's not in nearly as much trouble as they say. And if all we did was scrap the cap, because anyone earning over $110,000 a year stops paying into Social Security. So they're not on the same tax rate. So this is about fairness. Someone that's earning $200,000 a year or $1 million a year should pay the same percentage as someone working in McDonald's or here at the school. And if you do that, if you scrap the cap, you eliminate a lot of the problems in the program. And with Medicare, changing Medicare to a voucher system does not fix any problems. That doesn't solve financial problems. It is a windfall to insurance companies, because people will go with their coupon into the competitive market. And the theory is, well, the market will be more competitive, and so it's going to clean up. But we have a competitive market now. So if I end up going into the market with my Cooper or Vouchon for Medicare, that insurance company needs to take their profit out of it. They're not going to be handling this for free. They're going to carve 20% out of it. To get these programs better funded, we need to get our economy on a better ground. You know, we've gone through funding 2 wars without any tax increase and with a tax decrease. It's important to get to fair taxation, let the wealthiest 1% pay their fair portion, and let's go back to the healthy economy of the Clinton years.
Thank you. Mr. Hastings?
Well, here is one of the issues that I believe will be a defining issue in the future years. Because these 2 programs, as I mentioned, will be going broke. If they go broke, and when people wring their hands and say, oh, I want to protect it, but you don't have a solution other than to criticize, they still go broke. And who benefits by that? Certainly not our children and our grandchildren. Now, I've offered a couple of choices. I believe the premium support would work. Why do I say that? The premium support would work because there is a program in Medicare right now that is premium support, and it works. It's called Part D Medicare, and those of you that are on it know that every year you get a choice of who's going to be your carrier. You know that, and you know that it works. We could replicate that with Medicare, and that is part of the solution. But when you just stand up in front of people and say, I want to preserve it, with no ideas, what happens? It goes broke. That is not a solution, and we're not doing our children and our grandchildren any good when you talk in those terms.
Thank you. Okay. Remember, no applause. No, that was his rebut. But you're going first on the next question. It's from the audience, and I'm going to combine these 2. They appear to me to be somewhat related. How can gas prices be lowered? And do you support or oppose offshore drilling for oil?
You know, I think it's super important that we protect our energy resources here and we conserve them so we're going to have them for the coming generations. To get oil prices down, one thing, we need to stop subsidizing the oil companies. Doc Hastings has voted for tax breaks for big oil and big gas all these years, and it has not come back to us in lower prices. We need to make it more competitive, and I think it's important to keep our resources here. With the coal and the recent bill, Stop the War on Coal, which is a complete deregulation of the coal industry, that is taking our coal and shipping it off to China, basically. We get the environmental hazards, a company gets the profits. We need to keep our resources here, and we need to work on alternative energy and fund alternative energy so that we can be more energy dependent all over.
Thank you. Mr. Hastings.
First of all, I am in favor of an all-of-the-above energy plan, and that includes hydropower, it includes nuclear power, it includes wind, but it certainly does not ignore oil, gas, and coal. I think the American public is better served when we have an all-of-the-above energy plan, specifically on gas prices. The way you reduce gas prices is you create more supply. Oil is an international market, and it's largely controlled by a cartel, about 40%, called OPEC. The way you beat cartels is you outsupply the cartel. Now, in America, we have tremendous resources here in the United States that we're not utilizing. As chairman of the House Natural Resources Committee, I have jurisdiction over those lands. And the potential that we have can make us energy independent. Just to give you one example, we burn about 20 million barrels a day in the United States. In Anwar alone, that I support opening, the known reserves there are 10 billion barrels. I support offshore drilling. I support offshore drilling in the Atlantic coast and the Pacific coast. In California, we don't know for sure because you never know what the resources are there until you drill. The potential is in excess of 1 trillion barrels. Now, what would happen if we created our own energy sources in this country? Obviously, energy jobs are good jobs. Obviously, a growing economy has to have energy. And from a national security standpoint, does it make sense for us to have to rely on oil coming from, say, Venezuela? Hugo Chavez is hardly a friend. Or Iran, or any place else in the Middle East when we have these resources here? So I have devoted my time as chairman on the committee, rightfully so, to look at how we can create and expand our energy production in this country. The potential is there for national security reasons and for our growing economy reasons. So I do support drilling offshore in both the Atlantic and Pacific coasts.
You know, oil production is so important, and we have offshore drilling, and we have regulations for it. I oppose the complete deregulation of the oil industry that Doc Hastings has proposed this year. And I think it's so important when we look at these reserves, are we keeping them here, or are we sending them off for other countries to burn? So I think it's important that America develop a comprehensive energy plan, but we need to remove the price supports, the subsidies for big oil that has a 2% tax rate. So why are we giving Chevron a tax rate? This does not come back into jobs for us, and it does not come back in lower oil prices.
So, Mr. Baechler.
Congress is almost a universally disliked institution. In fact, Gallup's most recent numbers show that just 13% of Americans approve the job of Congress. In fact, this is putting it on track for the worst numbers in an election year since this poll began. One of the biggest reasons for this is that voters view the polarization of the parties is forcing a lack of compromise. So my question is this: other than issues specific to this district or this state, can you name 3 areas in which you would be willing to compromise in order to get legislation passed?
First question for me. I think in every area we have to be willing to compromise to get legislation passed. I think part of having Congress actually work, I wish there was a way that when we went in there, we were no longer affiliated with a party, because we're supposed to serve the people of our district and the people of America. And it's important to work together on issues about farming, issues that affect our seniors. And all of this comes back to, how do you get Congress working? Congress is kind of a wash in a sea of money. Everything is done with lots and lots of money. I was told I couldn't run for Congress without $1 million, but because we started Baby Jogger with no money, it did not seem impossible to me to run for Congress. Maybe it's a little bit like Mr. Smith went to Washington. But I think it's important that in Congress that we maybe have some simple changes that take the money out of the equation so Congress can actually work. Because if we went over to you panelists and we said, we're so fond of you and you're so ethical, here's a check for $10,000 for your favorite charity, that would skew things a little bit. That would be unseemly. I think congressmen and women should be held to the same standard as judges. We esteem our judges, we think the world of them, but we don't allow them to take money from people whose cases they're going to hear. And I realize these are campaign contributions, but it's still the same thing. So how do we get there? Maybe that's not practical, but a simple standard held to the same standard as judges so that we can get the work done for the people of this district. Because that's what the focus should be on, the people of this district, not fundraising for the next campaign.
Thank you. Mr. Hastings?
The question is what would I be willing to compromise on? I'd be willing to compromise on each and every piece of legislation that passes through the House and the Senate. But you have to understand, again, the genius of our founding fathers and how the process works to understand that that has not happened when I talk about legislation passing both houses. Again, the genius of our founding fathers was to divide power. They didn't give all the power to the executive branch. They didn't give all the power to the legislative branch. But in the legislative branch, they divided the power even further to the House and the Senate, 2 distinct bodies. Legislation cannot get to the president unless it passes both bodies in precisely the same form. So that implies a responsibility for both houses in order to pass legislation. The most important budget the most important document any public office has is the budget. The Senate has not passed a budget in 3 years. So we in the House have passed a budget in those 3 years. So when you don't have a budget with a very basic blueprint, how do you compromise with the other side when they don't have anything out there to compromise with? I know that their budget would be different. I know it would. But pass something and then we'll compromise. We have passed legislation out of the House dealing with regulatory reform. We have passed legislation out of the House dealing with energy. In every case, it's gone to the Senate, and there's been no like legislation to pass. So how do you compromise when they don't have anything to go to work out your differences? Now, if I sound very, very partisan on this, I will admit I'm partisan because I'm also critical. when one body elected by the people don't do their work, haven't passed a budget in 3 years. Do you think the mosquito control districts in our county here have a budget? You bet they would, or the directors would be thrown out. But for 3 years, we haven't had a budget in the Senate, and everything backs up behind that. So to answer your question, I'm willing to compromise. I know there's going to be differences between the House and the Senate. They're two distinct bodies. But pass something so we could come together and find out what our differences are. When you don't know what the differences are because they didn't pass anything, it gets pretty frustrating. And that's why the trust of the people have gone down, from my point of view, for that reason.
Thank you. Anything else?
Yeah, I may be naive on this, but I think when a person is honored by going into Congress, they take a vow to support the Constitution and also the President. And with all due respect, Congressman, you hold hearing after hearing where you're talking about Obama's job-killing program in coal, oil, and the dams, and I don't think that's building coalition.
Okay. Mr. McConnell.
Every election cycle, the tax code comes under fire. Do you believe that there needs to be major changes in our tax code? And if so, what would those changes be? And be as specific as you can, please.
Well, first of all, I mentioned earlier and I alluded earlier, we have to get into a situation where we have a permanent tax code so there's predictability for the investors and the entrepreneurs and the small businesses in our country to make the necessary investments to get our economy growing. Our tax code has grown complicated over time. The last time we had a reform of that was in 1986. In the budget that I voted for earlier this year, again, passed the House, I support it, has not been acted on the Senate, has a provision in the budget, which of course is a blueprint on the federal level, to reform the tax code. I am in favor of that. I'm in favor of reducing the tax levels down to 2 levels and getting rid of loopholes. Now, the question is, okay, what loopholes should be there? And there's a myriad of them that are there. I think the rule of thumb is if they apply to an industry across the board, they're probably not a loophole. But if you take an industry and get one part of that industry and give them a tax break, that's probably a loophole. Like, for example, green cars. We give tax breaks to people that buy green cars, but we don't do it for people that buy other cars. To me, that's a loophole. That should be looked at. But I will say this, I am in support of that, but the tax code is so complex that we need to have an open debate for that. And the Ways and Means Committee in the House, where all tax policies start, has started that process. There will be transparency. We'll have a debate on the pros and cons of the tax code. And I will obviously weigh in on those areas that I think are important to my constituents. But we need to have certainty in the tax code. And that's what I have heard over and over from small businesses and people that want to make investments. They just don't know what the tax codes are, so they're sitting on cash. And by the way, it's not only happening in this district, it's happening across the country. That's why we're seeing anemic, less than 2% growth in our economy, because those that make a dynamic free economy like this have to have certainty, and the tax code is a big part of that.
Ms. Baechler.
Well, Doc Hastings, you voted for the Ryan budget. And the Ryan budget, according to the Congressional Budget Office, for millionaires would give a tax break of about $240,000. And for the people in the top 1%, the tax break, the multimillionaires, would get a tax break each year of over $1 million. So if that's simplifying the tax code, I don't think that's what I'm looking for. I really like what happened in the Bill Clinton years. You know that the taxes on the wealthiest people went up just slightly, 3%. And then there were incentives so that if you bought a copy or you invested in research or you hired more workers, then you lowered your tax code or your tax amount. And we used that at Baby Jogger. We were in an economically depressed area, and we could use the fact that we were hiring people to lower our taxes. And that's a win-win situation.
Thank you.
Well, first of all, you mentioned several times that I voted for the Ryan budget. I've admitted to that. I thought the Ryan budget was a very good budget, and I have no problems with that. But let me talk about the 1% or taxing the rich, however you want to say that. Because of our tax code, many small businesses are organized and they pay their taxes as individuals. I can say that for myself when I was in business. And if you start taxing them, what you are in effect doing are taxing the job creators in this country. And whenever you tax something, you tend to get less of it. This game that we are hearing of class warfare in our country, I don't think is healthy for our future in our country. Everybody aspires to be something different in the future. But if you tax, quote, the rich, as a matter of fact, you are taxing well over 50% of those businesses that are organized as individuals. Those are the job creators in this country, and of course, I would never want to vote to increase taxes on them.
Thank you. Ms. Cowley, your next question, and you go first.
We live in a desert, and we have a growing population, growing energy needs, and growing agricultural needs to feed the global world population. What do you plan to do to meet our water needs for these growing demands and still preserve our waterways from pollution?
I think this is one of the most critical areas for our region. How do we plan ahead so that our crops, our farms, and our industries are going to be okay in 10 years or 20 years? And again, the Yakima River Enhancement Plan has been a really neat example of everyone coming together to work on those. I think it's important to meet a lot with the people of the area, and it's important to have a clear goal. You know, where are we now, and where do we need to be in terms of water storage in the next 50 years? We've heard the studies from the University of Washington say that I think by 2050 we will lose the sixth reservoir, which is the snowpack on the Cascades. We have to plan ahead for that. We have to protect from water losses, and we have to make sure everybody gets to come to the table to do the planning.
Thank you.
Water is clearly very, very important when you live in a desert like we live in. In fact, the wealth that has been created is because we have a certainty of water. Does that sound like a certainty of the tax code? I think they're analogous. But the Yakima River Basin has just been mentioned several times. It's because of legislation that I have offered that we're having this study right now. And I have sent, I have one of my staff that has been to virtually every one of those meetings, and I congratulate the stakeholders as they're working their way through here, through that process. But the important part of that process is, number one, is we have to have more storage in the Yakima Basin. There are other issues that are already associated when you're dealing with environmental issues. But point number one is there has to be storage first. Because you have storage first, then you can have certainty in the future, especially from an agriculture standpoint. And I do believe, by the way, that we are going to grow more here in this part of the country because we don't have the natural disasters that other parts have. So it's incumbent upon us to utilize and get more storage. And finally, I'll make one more observation. The Columbia River, clearly, I mean, it's a great river, but I firmly believe that the Columbia River is not over-appropriated. In other words, we could use more of the Columbia River water in other areas. And I will do obviously what I can to see that happen. But obviously our state legislature has to be part of that process, as they are. In the Yakima River Basin, I just might add, Secretary Salvador, the Interior Secretary, came in at my request, and Governor Gregoire joined us at a meeting on a Sunday in Yakima, as a matter of fact. And he is supportive of more storage and of that process going forward. So the stakeholders have a lot going, but I just want to repeat, storage is the most important element of whatever plan comes out of there.
Thank you. Anything to add?
Oh, just the Grand Coulee Dam is a great example of a project that a Democrat president brought in that brought irrigation to this area and helped it to flower. And projects like that, I do agree that we need storage, and projects like that need to be funded because that will bring jobs to this area and help us to protect the future too.
Thank you. Our next audience question is this, and Mr. Hastings, please go first. We'll wait for the telephone to quit ringing. Okay. Please speak to the advisability of accepting campaign donations from companies whose best interests may conflict with America's. interest.
Well, first of all, it's against federal law for me to accept any campaign contributions from companies. So I don't accept campaign contributions from companies. But I am very proud that I have a very broad base of support, and I have over the years. For example, I have over 3,000 Washingtonians, individual Washingtonians that have contributed to my campaign, and I'm very, very proud of that. But it is against federal law for me to accept campaign contributions from companies, so there's nothing more to be said about that.
Okay, Ms. Baechler?
You know, at Baby Jogger, I was the CEO for 18 years, and I had 18 years of making ethical decisions because we started very small, but we eventually sold around the world to over 1 million families. And so a little plastic piece that might come from Taiwan or China, we always manufactured here. We were the last stroller manufacturer left in North America, or in America. So we always asked, what is the right thing to do? What is the right thing to do? I think it's really important that even when campaign contributions come from individuals, we need to know where they're coming from. And it's really important, I think, that if we're working for the people of this district, maybe we should be supported by the people of this district. And I'm very proud that all of my campaign donations have come from this district.
Go ahead.
Well, I would just say that I have over 300 individuals in Washington State that have contributed to my campaign, and I'm very proud of that. The last report I saw, my opponent had 19 contributions from Washington State.
Okay. We have time for one more round of questions. Mr. McConnell, we're back to you, and Ms. Baechler will answer first.
There's a lot of talk about repealing Obamacare. If Obamacare is repealed, what should Congress do, or what can Congress do to address the rising cost of health care and to provide insurance coverage to those without?
You know, I'm going to work to support Obamacare, and I will do everything I can to help support it staying. And if it is unfortunately repealed, which will be devastating for people with pre-existing conditions, with young people going to college, and we have so many people that are uninsured that we're already paying for. So then I think we need to go to a single payer system. The best countries in the world have figured this out. We can do this. And what we've seen with the Affordable Care Act is already there's a mandate on Medicaid to really look at and reduce costs by trying to make sure that readmissions are down. There's a lot of savings that can be had there. My opponent had voted for the Medicare Part D, and I think that was an enormous amount of the budget costs in the deficit. And again, we need to make sure that the government can negotiate for Medicare and Medicaid to get lower prescription prices for our citizens in this region.
Thank you. Mr. Hastings.
Well, I have said several times, and in fact I said in my opening statement that I would vote to repeal Obamacare again. I've done so twice, and I voted over 30 times to repeal parts of it. Why? Because it is a government-run system. In the history of where we've seen government-run systems, inevitably it gets to the government making choices who gets the health care. In a brutal way of saying it, that leads to rationing. And all the promises that were put in place about how good Obamacare would be have already been proven to be a little bit different. For one thing, it was suggested that you wouldn't have to change plans. That is already not happening. People are getting off plans. It does, this plan takes $700 billion from Medicare that is already going broke. And of course, it raises taxes by $1 trillion. So what are the solutions? The solutions, as I said in the outset, is for seniors to be able to make choices. And as I mentioned, somebody that turns 65 is still capable of making choices. So I believe that there's several things we can do. We can equalize the tax deduction for insurance policies across the board. Right now, individuals don't get the same tax deductions. We can eliminate lawsuits. We could have tort reform. That would save. States have shown that that saves money. We can expand health savings accounts. Health savings accounts is a policy that has been greatly restricted, by the way, by Obamacare, and yet it was one of the fastest growing areas in the insurance business. And we can allow people to buy health insurance across state lines. If you can buy car insurance across state lines, why not health insurance? Now, what does all of this come together mean? It means that seniors and anybody looking for health care have more choices. When people have more choices, costs tend to come down. And let me point out one thing, because Medicare Part D has been brought up twice. Medicare Part D I voted for. Medicare Part D, when it was put in place 7 years ago, it was estimated to cost X dollars. It came in 40% under budget. Why? Because of the choices that were afforded to seniors, and if you're in Part D, you know you have choices every year. That's how we should reform our healthcare system.
Thank you. Anything else?
Doc, you have the finest health care in the world, and you get it for the rest of your life as a congressman. I stand here as a woman that doesn't have health care. In Washington State alone, we have 1 million people without health care, and the Affordable Care Act is going to get health care for 800,000 of those. That is going to create jobs all over the state. I've been hearing this from people that run clinics. They're ramping up. It means jobs for our working people in this area. And my challenge to you would be to say, how many people in your congressional district are uninsured?
Okay, thank you. Ms. Cowley, your next question.
If you are elected, what bill would you put forth that would change the tariff laws and change the trade laws to benefit our growers and our business people in this area?
Mr. Hastings.
Well, let me just respond to the last part. I don't know where you get the notion that I have lifetime health care, because that simply is not the case. Now, if you're suggesting that's associated with a congressional pension plan, I don't take a congressional pension. So I don't get whatever it is that you suggested I have. I have been very much a free trader. As I mentioned earlier, I got an award from a free trade organization, one of the few in the House. And our largely agriculture industry benefits because we have free trade, especially because of our proximity to the Far East. But I was a big supporter of the Columbia Free Trade Agreement. In fact, I was down there last year on a trade mission, and I was very glad that the Panama and South Korean ones. We need now to continue with that. And I'll criticize this administration because they have not moved anywhere at all in expanding trade. But I am very much one that believes in that. In the last 10 years, the good news has been that in trade agreements that were negotiated, agriculture has risen to a higher level. That is good. They were always the compromisee in prior trade agreements. Now they are reaching more and more parity, and of course that helps our industry because of the diversity of agriculture products we have in our district. But I have always been and will continue to be a free trader.
Thank you. Ms. Baechler?
I think it's really important to look at best practices, to say, what can we do? How do we meet with our farmers? How do we find what agreements are impacting them and cutting them off? I know now we're bringing up asparagus from Chile, and our asparagus levels have gone down. I think it's important to have a comprehensive policy that looks at it from all sides and says, where is it that we want to go? What would really help our farmers, and what will help our exports? There is so much market out there and so much demand for American products. For example, if the Yakima Nation had a brand of their own apples or free-range beef or something like that, the demand would be very high for that across borders, and we'd like to see that happen.
Thank you. Anything else?
No, I would just simply say that trade is important. We are, in the rural population, a very small area, but we have a very dynamic economy. And we have that dynamic economy because we allow for trade. I think we need to expand that more. And again, I have been a proponent of free trade.
Thank you. Mr. Pojla, your question, please.
Well, I'll follow up on a previous question of mine because I don't necessarily feel the voters got a satisfactory answer from either of the candidates. The system was designed, the system being the American political system, was designed to vote for the person and not the party. In fact, it was George Washington who felt that political parties would be the death of this country. So, to rephrase an earlier question, can each of you name 3 issues or areas where you differ from your political party?
Ms. Baechler, you're first.
Oh, that takes a little thinking. Areas I differ from my own political party. You know, that's a real hard one. I was disappointed about Guantanamo. I realized there's tremendous security issues. We had an empty jail up in Yakima, and I sort of think, oh, this could help our economy up here, bring jobs. But I'm really, that's something I differ with my party about, that Guantanamo has not been solved. And the men are not getting habeas corpus. Trying to think if there's a different one. No, I really like my party. But I also like the other party. Growing up in Yakima, having the baby jogger company, all my customers were Republicans. And that's the one thing that struck me when I decided to run for office, is these are my neighbors. When you sell to someone, when you have a business, you don't think of your customer as, okay, which party are they in? That's your customer and you serve them. And to me, that is what serving in Congress should be. It should be working for the people of this district all the time. And affiliation should not matter.
Thank you. Mr. Hastings?
Well, first of all, I just want to say that there are two political parties for a reason, because they have different political philosophies. But neither party is altogether one size fits all. There are differences between those parties. And I think probably the best way to describe it is as Ronald Reagan described it. And he was discussing members of the party kind of supporting the cause, and he said that somebody that is 80% with you is not your enemy. I work across the aisle. I think probably the question maybe is better phrased, do I work across the aisle? And the answer to that is yes. And I can give you a couple of answers. First of all, on Yucca Mountain. I believe that that is, in fact, I know it is a national repository for waste. It so happens that there are Democrats that agree with me, and I agree with Democrats, that Yucca Mountain should be opened as a national repository. The B reactor legislation that is pending in the House, and there's legislation pending in the Senate. The prime sponsor of that legislation in the Senate happens to be a Democrat senator from New Mexico. And so the point is, you work across the aisle, and I have found that the largest differences between the party, and I would say this if I were a Democrat, and I can say it as a Republican, the differences within the party tend to be a difference of degree. Because the Republican Party, I believe, firmly believes in individual initiative, taking risk, getting rewards for those risks. I think the Democrat Party has evolved into a party of government knows best type of party. And I think that while we can have a debate on that, and the American people will make a choice where they want to go, I believe that is the differences between the two parties, and for that reason, I'm proud to call myself a Republican.
Thank you. Ms. Baechler?
As a community organizer the last couple of years, I worked on 2 initiatives and petitions in Yakima, and one of the most fun times I ever had was calling up Max Galladay of the Yakima GOP and asking if I could come in and talk about these initiatives. And they were very kind. They let me come in. People still speak to me about it. And when I decided I was running for Congress, I did call and I said, can I come talk to you about my campaign? And he was very kind. He said, hon, you know, you're a Democrat and we're Republicans, but that's what I really wanted to do, was to go talk to any group I can find, because these are our voters and it's our country. And again, the labels, in a way, I hope in 50 years are much less so, because we're not gangs, we're the same people. And if your neighbor was in trouble, you would run out and help them, and vice versa. And so these differences are not very real. We all care about our families. We want better schools. We need jobs. And we need our economy here to be healthy and strong.
Thank you. Our last question is from the audience. I have quite a stack here. If I didn't read your question, it's because they did talk about that subject, were asked by the panel, or did include it. I have 2 that weren't mentioned, and I'm going to ask them both, if that's okay, if you would address both of these in your 2 minutes. And Mr. Hastings, you're first. What is your stance on collective bargaining for the workforce and business in the 4th Congressional District and our country? And do you favor maintaining the Head Start program at its present level or greater? And how would you promote that?
On collective bargaining, I support anybody's right to organize in this country. And certainly the union movement has done that in the past. What I do have a question with and don't agree with is the coercive part of having to collective bargain. And I believe that it's better off if you have a freedom on both sides. But I certainly don't disagree with people being able to get together in forum and for their common good. And the second one was on the
Head Start.
On Head Start. I have voted in the past to fund Head Start, and I will continue to do so. But I do want to make this point, and this is the important part of it. We have a fiscal issue in this country. We have a fiscal cliff that we're running off. We are running huge deficits. And to give you an idea of how large the deficits are, I mentioned in my opening statement that we are running trillion-dollar deficits. We throw trillions around like it doesn't mean anything, but $1 trillion is a lot of money. And let me give you an example. If you wanted to pay off $1 trillion debt at $1 million a day starting tomorrow, it would take you nearly 3,000 years to pay off $1 trillion. And we have a $16 trillion national deficit, or national debt. So when we start looking at programs, we're going to have to look at the worthiness of how worthy they are. I have supported Head Start in the past, but I believe virtually every program, unless there's legal ramifications otherwise, that they should be subject to making sure that we have our fiscal house in order. Because our children and our grandchildren are the ones that will not benefit if we don't start that process right now.
Ms. Baechler, collective bargaining and Head Start.
Thank you. I support collective bargaining, and I stand for the unions of our area. The Tri-Cities is just a beautiful example of a really healthy economy with extremely skilled workers. But when I run into someone that's middle class and has good benefits, they're almost always in a union, and collective bargaining is behind that. So I do support that. With Head Start, I support Head Start. I think it's important to go beyond that too, and to be looking at early childhood education and what programs work. And again, if we had Robert Kennedy here, instead of going to the moon, could we say, how do we set up the best education in the world so that America is the very best place to get an education? And how do we get there? And maybe Head Start would eventually change under that, but we'd be going in the right direction.
Thank you. Do you have anything to add? Thank you. Okay, we will now move on to closing statements, and Mr. Hastings will go first.
Well, thank you very much. And first, I want to thank the organizers for hosting this event. I believe that this is very important, and I want to congratulate all of you in attendance tonight who are here, and those of you that are tuning in on the radio and will see the replays on television. This is an important election, as I mentioned, and your participation here and in watching in the future is an important part of your participating in our democratic system. I believe that this system has shown the real choice that voters have for our country and our district's future, and for those who will serve as their voice and representative in Congress. My opponent wants to go to Washington, D.C. to support President Obama's policies and the policies of Nancy Pelosi and the Congressional Democrats. I want to go to D.C. to reverse, as I've said several times, President's policies and Obamacare's that is hurting our country. We simply can't afford more of the same government knows best. Americans deserve a more efficient, a less intrusive government. America's future depends upon a commitment to freedom and liberty, where hard work is rewarded, and where hard work provides for a brighter future for you and for your families and future generations. I believe that the voters of the 4th District share this belief, and that's why I'm asking you for your vote, so we can get our nation back on track to ensure that our children and our grandchildren will enjoy a secure and prosperous future. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Baechler.
I have to quibble just a little because Congressman Hastings keeps attributing statements and feelings to me, and this is our first conversation, so I'm not quite sure how he gets there. But I came from Baby Jogger. That was an extraordinary experience, and we practiced beautiful customer service. And we also practiced lean business. We served over 1 million families in 40 countries, and that's really good training for working to serve the people of this district. And I love business. I think it's so important that we support our businesses, that we look for ways to help them to innovate, for we look for ways to help them to save money and to create jobs. We need tax incentives to create jobs. So it would be an honor to serve on your behalf. I will try to bring energy independence and jobs back to Central Washington. This will involve exports and tax incentives and listening to our people. I think we need health care and the Affordable Care Act for the people of Central Washington so that they can actually have insurance. And that if you go to the hospital, you're not having folded into your insurance all the people that don't have care. We have to plan for water. We have to take care of women's rights. We need the Lilly Ledbetter Act. We need the Equal Rights Amendment. At least half of the people of this congressional district are women, and I think I will work hard for them. I don't see that Congressman Hastings has had a lot of meetings with women. So education, taking care of our seniors in this district. I will work across the aisles. I hope I get the chance to serve you, and thank you very much for letting me be here tonight.
Thank you. This brings the forum to a close. I would like to thank you, the audience, for attending. Hopefully, the information that you received tonight will help you when you vote. I'd also like to thank Columbia Basin College for providing this facility, Charter Communications for taping it for rebroadcast, and the Tri-City Herald for promoting the forum. And again, thank you to our 3 panelists. And now we can thank both candidates for taking time from their busy schedule to be with us tonight. So good night. Please drive home safely and be sure to vote and send in your ballot by November 6th.